EF21 is sponsored by the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City and KKFI 90.1 FM, Kansas City Community Radio. This is federal carbon pricing legislation. Please welcome your hosts, Stephen Melton and Jennifer Brown.
Hi, I'm Stephen Melton. I'm a former Army officer, career Army officer who lives in Parkville, Missouri right now. And I'm here to introduce the star of our show, Jennifer Brown. Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Brown. I got involved with Citizens Climate Lobby, basically out of concern for my children's future and all children, all of our generation's children. I'm a veterinarian by trade, and I live on the Kansas side in Prairie Village.
I forgot to mention my grandchildren. That's why I'm so involved in this, is because I've got grandchildren, grandnieces, and nephew, and I do everything I can do till as long as I can do it for those folks. We owe them a planet which is habitable when they take over. It's our time to do what we have to do to make the planet habitable for them. And what I'd like to do is take our faces off if it's okay with you, Jennifer, is take our faces off the screen and we're going to show you some slides. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Of course it's okay. We'll show some slides. Okay. Oh, share. Okay. And play. Okay, so here are the slides, and this is our presentation for EF21. And first of all, I want to thank Bob and everybody else at the Climate Council of Greater Kansas City for putting on this tremendous event. It's a great opportunity. I know it's a lot of work on your part, but it's just a tremendous event here. We're going to talk, and I want to thank all of our visitors who are listening to this, either live or are going to look at it on YouTube later on. We're going to be talking about federal carbon pricing legislation, and we are, Jennifer and I, the co-leaders, the chapter leaders of Citizens Climate Lobby, the Kansas City chapter. I'm on the Missouri side, and Jennifer is on the Kansas side. We have a website if you want to learn more about this, and I'm sure you will. And you see it printed at the bottom in red. It's kcccl.org. Kansas City Citizens Climate Lobby.org. And we're going to be posting this presentation on that website. Thank you all for coming.
Okay, so what is Citizens Climate Lobby? We're international. We are nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're grassroots and volunteer driven with nearly 200,000 US members. We're organized across the United States in some 485 local chapters according to congressional districts. We work toward a comprehensive free market solution to climate change called Carbon Fee and Dividend. The Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, a bill that was recently reintroduced into Congress as HR 2307, is partly a result of our lobbying efforts. And I'd also like to mention that the carbon pricing that is happening in Canada right now is also related to our lobbying efforts up there.
Yeah.
Thanks, please.
Well, you know, I was looking at that picture, and, you know, we've seen recent pictures from the Capitol a few months ago, and how nice it is when democracy works, you know, and I hope that next time we go back to Washington, D.C. to lobby our Congress people in person, that we're able to meet like that again. That's my hope.
It's very powerful.
Well, I'm trying to advance the slide, but I'm not having any luck. There we go. Okay, so who supports carbon pricing legislation? And really the main question is who doesn't? Because lately, in the past few months, if you've been reading the news, you've noticed that a tremendous number of people are starting to vocally support carbon pricing legislation. and not just in the United States, but internationally. First of all, let's go to the scientific bodies. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said in its latest report that carbon pricing is absolutely necessary in order to meet the goals of keeping global warming within 1.5 degrees centigrade. The US National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine have said the same, that carbon pricing is absolutely necessary. Economists, all the living former chairs of the US Federal Reserve signed an open letter in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was a couple of years ago, calling for carbon fee and dividend, much like what we're going to discuss when we talk about these bills in front of Congress. And all 12 former chairs of the President's Council of Economic Advisors at that time signed on to that open letter. As far as business groups, over the winter, the US Chamber of Commerce signed on to carbon pricing and said that they want the United States to lead the world in addressing climate change so that we can meet our Paris commitments. The US Business Roundtable, which is a group of CEOs from huge corporations in the United States, signed a letter in the fall, also asking for carbon pricing. The Electrical Power Supply Association recently did its letter. The American Petroleum Institute, of all people, said in a letter that they want carbon pricing as well, even though that they know that it's going to hurt their business interests. And you can't open the Wall Street Journal and read it, without every week finding another editorial saying that we need to go to carbon pricing in the United States. It isn't just scientific bodies, economists, business groups, but how about climate heroes? James Hansen, the one who brought global warming to the attention of the United States and the world. And
former NASA director.
Yes, former worked for NASA. And he is on the board of CCL, by the way, and he strongly endorses carbon pricing and has worked for carbon pricing for the last few years. Paul Hawken of Drawdown fame, and Drawdown's been talked about in these webinars, and his solutions for what we need to do to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere, says in the end that carbon pricing will greatly accelerate all of the solutions he has in his book. But, you can't, in America, you got to talk about the billionaires. Elon Musk and Bill Gates are going around lobbying for carbon pricing very vocally, and local leaders. The city of Kansas City, Missouri passed a resolution for supporting carbon fee and dividend, which we'll talk about a little bit later. They also have made carbon fee and dividend a federal legislative priority. And you see there Mayor Quentin Lucas, who sponsored those resolutions when he was a council member. ClimateGKC has also supported carbon fee and dividend, federal carbon pricing legislation, and you see there Lindsay Constance and Mike Kelly. And if you listened to the presentation at 11 o'clock this morning, you got from ClimateGKC, you got to listen to them as well. And why does everybody support carbon fee and dividend, it seems nowadays? Well, here's a quotation from Janet Yellen, who's now President Biden's Secretary of the Treasury, and it says it perfectly. A carbon tax offers the most cost-effective lever to reduce carbon emissions at the scale and speed that is necessary. If we want to get the job done, we're going to have to go to carbon pricing. And why is everybody jumping on the bandwagon to endorse it? Well, because simply carbon pricing has to happen. Because it has to happen, it's inevitable. And everybody, including the American Petroleum Institute, are now saying, if it's got to happen, if it's inevitable, we might as well get on with it so we can do this the most efficient way we can.
Okay, so polling has consistently shown that about 2/3 of all American voters support a fee on carbon with revenue returned to households. This includes a majority of Republicans and 75% of Republicans under age 40.
You know, that's stunning. You know, so, you know, this is one of the problems that frankly, one of the political parties has, is that the older people in the party support one climate policy and the younger people who are going to have to live with the results of that climate policy support different policies. You know, the young Republicans who are raising children now are worried for their children's futures. And that shows in all the polling data. So what is the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act and what does it do? Well, the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act was, what was it done? It was put in front of the last Congress, but it went nowhere because everybody knew that with a Republican Senate, frankly, and a Republican president, it was going to go nowhere. But it's been reintroduced just a few weeks ago into this Congress. It's called HR 2307. And when you talk to your congressmen and senators about this, you know, they always want to know what the number is because that's what's specific. And so what does it promise? Well, it promises four things: net zero by 2050. And that is what everybody is aiming at. That's what the Paris Climate Agreement said, net zero by 2050. That's what the Biden administration is saying. That's what ClimateGKC says. Net zero by 2050 is shorthand for the goal that we're aiming at. The other thing it does is it puts money in your pocket. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, but it actually takes money from the fossil fuel companies and puts it in the pockets of American families. It saves lives. We underestimate in our minds the health effects of the pollution caused by burning fossil fuels. It's 100,000 or more lives in the United States every year are lost due to the pollution effects of burning fossil fuels. So once we quit burning fossil fuels, we can save a lot of lives. And it will also incentivize affordable clean energy. There's three words there. You know, we need energy. We know we need energy to live. We want clean energy. I don't know that there's anybody opposed to clean energy, but there's concern that it could not be affordable. And affordability is something that this bill will ensure. You know, we talked about local supporters of carbon fee and dividend, or, you know, this kind of legislation. And Representative Cleaver was one of the 80 representatives who sponsored the bill in the last Congress. And we are hopeful that in due time he will sponsor HR 2307 as well.
How does it work? Yeah, so basically for fossil fuels, including coal, oil, natural gas, a fee would be charged as it's mined or pumped out of the ground or brought into a port. The fee would be per amount of CO2 that would be released once the fossil fuel is used. It starts at $15 per ton of CO2 and would rise in a predictable way, $10 per year. Farm and military fuel would be excluded. To give you an idea, a $15 per ton of CO2 rate raises the price of gasoline about 15 cents.
Okay. Okay, so that's how it works. That's where all the money comes from. And we're talking a lot of money here. I mean, even if you look at when it starts off at $15 a ton, it's $115 billion a year. And then of course, as it goes up, at some points, it's hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Over the lifetime of this program, if it meets its goal of being net zero by 2050, over $3 trillion in carbon fees will have been assessed and passed to the American people. $3 trillion. And that is enough money to move the economy in the direction we want it to go. That's a tremendous incentive for people to lower their carbon footprints. So, okay, so Jennifer explained where the money comes from the fossil fuel companies. Where does it go? Well, it goes to citizens like you and me. The dividends would be paid out monthly. So when you look at it from a money standpoint, all this money would just be an excise tax put on coal and petroleum. So it's simply an excise tax. There's already an existing excise tax, so it just changes the structure of the excise tax. The tax is collected by the US Treasury, which Janet Yellen is the Secretary of the Treasury, and it would be dispersed out monthly in payments to the American people. And the American people being defined as anybody with a Social Security number in the bill. Each adult would get one full share. Each child would get 1/2 share, with the money for the child, of course, going to the parents. The dividends could be spent any way an individual desires. Okay, there's no stipulation on how you spend the money. And the market pressures alone will reduce fossil fuel use over time. I mean, it's clear that when the money that's collected from the fossil fuels companies is going to raise the cost of everything that has the fossil fuels embedded in it, and it's going to make alternatives look more attractive. Okay? It's just going to make alternatives to fossil fuels look more attractive to businesses and to consumers, so that everybody starts to lower their carbon footprint.
Okay, so this is kind of a cool slide. You know, it's summarized at the top, the most vulnerable come out ahead. I'll just go into a little detail there. In 2020, Citizens Climate Lobby updated a study to assess the net financial impact on US households of basically this bill. So how is it gonna affect people's finances? And if you take a look at the graph, we've got the darker green and the lighter green areas. The darkened areas show the portion of the population that would receive more money more in dividend money than they would pay out in increased energy and living costs once the bill is implemented. So they're basically going to be wealthier after this bill is in place. If you look at the far left column, that's representing all US households, and it's showing you that 67% come out financially ahead. And then the rest of the columns here are categorized by income. And you can see that it's showing 98% of the lowest income quintile come out ahead. And then if you go all the way over to the far right, the wealthier households have a much higher carbon footprint. So the policy places the financial burden upon those who contribute the most emissions, inherently relieving the most economically vulnerable households from bearing the burden of decarbonizing the economy. And even though they pay the most, the wealthiest quintile really only experiences a fairly minor loss, defined as less than 0.2% of their pre-tax household income. So as our legislative director says, with carbon fee and dividend, winners win big and losers lose small.
Yeah, and that's really important. You know, there's a myth. It's sort of a, you know, an urban legend saying that carbon pricing would hurt the poor. And this data clearly shows that it would not hurt the poor, that the poor come out ahead in carbon pricing. And the reason why is because poor people have lower carbon footprints than the very rich people in quintile 5. So it's very important that everybody realize that this isn't an anti-poverty program, carbon fee and dividend, but it is designed so that it's progressive in the terms that the money is taken from the richer people and it moves towards people at the lower end of the income spectrum. You know, we have a question here from Norm Mentor, and he says, as these taxes make fossil fuels go away over time, would the family dividends decrease and stop? Do you want to answer that, Jennifer? Or you want me to answer that? Or?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead. Well, yes, that they would. And when you look at it, you know, you have the fees would be assessed beginning at $15 a ton and then go up to $25 a ton and then $35 a ton. And they're going to go up over time. But fossil fuel use is going to go down as the price increases. So if you look at 30 years on, let's say, if this program is successful, and it will be, over 30 years, we're going to expend or quit using fossil fuels. Sometime in the middle, around 15 years, is when you're going to see that $3,456 a year family dividend. Before that, it's going to be less. After that, it's going to be less. And in the bill is a phase out, which says when the money collected in carbon fees is, you know, not worth distributing, not worth collecting, and not worth distributing, the program will sunset. It will have achieved its goals of reducing fossil fuel use and CO2 emissions.
And
yeah, Jennifer?
I'd just like to add, you know, to emphasize the importance of the dividend, because there are certainly a variety of different carbon pricing programs, and the dividend is what helps the public get through this without pain. So you know, it's also what will make it'll help keep its popularity, so to speak. You know, and this has been tried in a number of different countries. Australia tried it, and they used it's tempting for some of the green groups to want to use that dividend for other ventures. And, you know, that makes it a lot harder on the public. In Australia, it was tried and overturned fairly quickly. Now as opposed to British Columbia, where it was started, a very similar program was started in 2008, and the dividends are returned to households, and it's enjoying good popularity. You know, it's still going. Emissions are dropping. It's an effective program.
And that's a great point that you raise. You got to think of these citizens and these households as being voters. And if you put a fee on fossil fuels like they did in Australia, and all people see is rising costs and no benefit to them, immediate benefit to them, you're going to lose the political will to carry this thing forward. You know, if the majority of people, and we see that they do, have an economic benefit from the program, then you're going to have the political will to maintain it. And so that's extremely critical. The dividend part is extremely critical to maintaining the political will to see the thing through to the end. And you know, it really becomes a game, doesn't it? You know, when every month you get your check and you get your letter, you know, from the Treasury saying this is what this check is all about. You know, if any of you are on Social Security, you know what these letters look like. And it tells you that, you know, the way to stay ahead is to reduce your carbon footprint. It's a way that every household can get their head in their game and become aware of their carbon footprint, and go, and when they enter the marketplace to buy anything, become very conscious about how that carbon footprint, what kind of carbon footprint they're investing in, and how they can avoid it as much as possible. So, you know, it's a game that every household can win. They can win this game by buying the right stuff and making the right investments. And I think that's very important. It's a game that every household can win.
Green up,
right,
save the money.
Okay. We all want to play games we can win. Okay. Well, it's also not just good for households, but it's good for the economy as well. And the reality is that there's more jobs that would be available in a clean, energy economy than there are available in the extraction of fossil fuels. The continued extraction of fossil fuels will make jobs, the economy will grow, and we'll have an increase in economic performance over time. Every country which has gone to renewable energy, you know, the scare at the beginning is it's going to cost all these jobs. The reality is it doesn't. You know, there are less than 50,000 coal mining jobs in the United States, less than 50,000. You know, if you took all the coal miners, they couldn't even fill Kauffman Stadium. You know, there are not that many jobs in many of these extracting industries, and there's a lot more jobs in terms of solar power, wind power, renewable power, and in just plain old efficiency. So we can create the kind of jobs that we want to create. We'll go to the next slide. It was, okay.
Yeah, so what do we achieve? I think, you know, the most important aspect of all of this is big and fast emissions reductions. The Energy Innovation Act targets net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. We'll certainly need other complementary policies, but putting a price on carbon is the single most powerful tool that we have. It's the best first step. Scientists and economists say that it takes us further, faster, with an expected 30% reduction in US emissions in the first 5 years alone. It will also result in huge medical savings due to reduced air pollution and an estimated 4.5 million lives saved in the next 50 years, just due to improved air quality alone. So it's impressive.
That's a lot of lives. You know, that's a lot more lives than COVID is costing, you know, to put it in perspective. That's just tremendous health burden. We got another question here, and this is from Al Frisbee. And Al says, some science folks suggest $15 initial amount is not enough to get things rolling. How can you both defend $15? So Jennifer, you want to
stab at that if you'd like.
You want to throw that at me? Okay, Al, thanks for the question.
No, I can take a stab at it. That's okay. You may have something to add, though.
Okay. You want me to start, and then you'll have the final word? That's how it works at my house. Okay. So this is why $15 is a great starting point, and with going up, knowing that it's going to go up $10 or $15 a year. And whether it goes up $10 or $15 a year, you know, the next year and the year after that and the year after that is really based on whether we're meeting our CO2 drawdown targets. So as long as we're on target, the next year it'll go up $10. If we're below target, it's going to go up $15. But first of all, it isn't just about households. Well, we'll start at the household level. If you're out buying a new car and they say, well, gasoline is cheap, and so, you know, you can buy this huge car, and you don't want to buy an electric car. But if you know that gasoline is going to go up in price by 10 or 15 cents a year, just based on these fees, you're going to be incentivized to buy a much smaller car or buy an electric car. If you know that, for instance, you know, it's going to go up by $10 or $15 a year, you know, and you're buying a new house, maybe you'll say, well, gee, I won't put in a gas furnace, I'll put in an electric furnace and I'll pay for some extra insulation. So it isn't just immediate purchases that people make for disposable goods. What really builds in CO2 production is the capital goods we buy, okay? It's the houses we buy that don't have adequate insulation. It's the gas heaters we have in them. It's the coal and gas-fired power plants that last for 50 years. It's the semi-trucks that we put on the road that last for 50 years. It's all this plant and equipment, you know, capital goods that we buy. When you know that it's going to go up by $10 or $15 a year, the fee, then you're going to buy a different set of capital goods. Now, the people who are most sensitive to this are going to be industry because, you know, the American free market system, when looked at from a firm perspective, is a way to minimize costs. When they see these costs are going to go up over the year, they're going to buy fixed equipment and make investments which are green and not dependent on fossil fuels. Families will do the same. Now, of course, you know, if we started off at $40 and went up, you know, $20 every year, the effect would be to lose political will. And let me just give you an example. Is, you know, I got a relative, an in-law, who has one of these huge monster pickup trucks, you know, and it gets maybe like $10 a gallon. If you start to tell the guy while he's still making payments on his car, on that truck, that you're going to make the cost of gasoline prohibitive, he'll never forgive you for it. I mean, you have lost his vote forever. But if you say, well, we're going to increase it, you know, 10 or 15 cents a year, then he can tolerate that. What we can't do is affect the purchase he's already made. What we need to do is affect the next purchase everybody makes. So that's why it makes sense to start small and get big. It will, by all the modeling, achieve the effect. And not just in the long term, but a 30% reduction in the first 5 years alone. And that's just starting at $15 a ton. So Jennifer, now you get the final word.
Well, I just add a couple of things. You know, economists who study this sort of thing are really focused on the fact that innovation will increase dramatically. And they think that that is going to really change the trajectory, you know, that you might be able to currently measure. And they feel very confident about this. They think that, you know, we have a target of 40% reduction by 2030, and they seem extremely confident that we will meet or likely exceed it. Now, I will also add that there are interim targets. So for example, if the bill was enacted now and we were not hitting our goals by 2023, then yeah, we go ahead and raise the amount of the fee goes from $10 to $15 per ton. I would also, we'll have an email that we can send out afterward, and I'd be happy to connect anyone who's watching to a study done by Noah Kaufman. Again, that they seem fairly confident in these targets. So it's not my specialty, but I'm happy to direct you to that.
Yeah. Well, you know, it makes sense. I mean, if it meets the target and it's politically palatable to the American people so that they can stick with it, then it makes a lot of sense. We have two questions, and one's from Bob Isaacson and one's from Norman Minter, but they're really the same question about whether the tax would apply to fuel being used to build, you know, to manufacture petrochemicals. and you know, plastics and nylon and polyester and things like that. Would the taxes apply to that fuel which is used, or those you know, the oil that's and natural gas that are used for those purposes? Jennifer, should I give this one to you?
Go ahead, Steve. It's all yours.
You want me to take it?
Yep.
When I read the bill, I didn't see any exclusion for you know, for the petrochemical industry. So I believe that they would again incur these costs for the fossil fuels, and it would to some extent increase the price of their products. To what extent, I don't know. Now, there's a lot of other some people who say that you know, the petrochemical industry is very inefficient and could use other techniques to reduce its CO2 use, like in the refineries where they have to heat, you know, the fuel to crack the petrochemical molecules to make them into different molecules. So there's no exclusion is the bottom line. There's no exclusion. I would say that only a very small percentage of petroleum mined is actually used in petrochemicals. Overwhelmingly, it's used as fuel.
We have about 4 minutes left on this session. So
let me, okay, well, okay, I just want to make sure that you know that there's two other bills. There's one bill that's been proposed by Senator Durbin of Illinois, and it's a carbon fee and dividend bill, just like what we talked about. The difference is only 75% of the revenue would go to the American citizens. Another amount of money would go for research and development and transition assistance for a few years for like coal miners. There's another bill in front of the House right now, which is a regulatory approach, is not carbon fee and dividend, which would mandate retail electricity companies provide 100% clean electricity by 2035. And I guess the bottom line is at the bottom. President Biden will assemble his climate package this summer. So we don't know what President Biden is going to propose as his climate package. So I'll let you sum up, Jennifer.
Yeah, so if you're wondering how you can help, one of the most important things you can do is to call or write your member of Congress and request that they co-sponsor the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, again, HR 2307. This is particularly effective if you do it on a monthly basis. And if you would like a monthly reminder with a handy script and the phone numbers that you need, you can sign up for our text alerts at cclusa.org/MCC. Again, this and other links for our organization will be available in the follow-up email. You can also write President Biden or his National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy, and ask them to put a carbon tax in his climate package. You can join Citizens Climate Lobby. We'd love to have your help. And the most important thing, of course, is to vote climate in every election. So thanks very much for your time today. And if there's any time for questions left, we will check them out. Otherwise, I will answer anything we haven't, again, in that follow-up email.
Bob, do we have time for questions?
you have 1 minute left.
We have 1 minute. Okay, so Barbara Mullins asked, the main criticisms of carbon pricing legislation and what is CCL's counter arguments to those criticisms? I think there's two. I think that there's one that we talked about before, and this sort of urban legend that carbon pricing would disadvantage poor people. That is simply not true, as we showed you.
Also, can I say really quickly, I think that people often think it will hurt the economy, and that is completely the opposite of the truth as well.
Exactly, exactly. And I think I think that Well, I think those are the two main ones. What's the biggest obstacle to enacting carbon pricing legislation? Well, right now, I would have to say it's those two considerations we just talked about, and that we have a party which is very confused about what to do. We have a major political party which has been purged of moderates on this issue. And when we get sanity back in the American political process, that may resolve itself. But I would like to say we have an excellent chance to pass it with this administration and this Congress. We should not say that this can't be done this summer. This can be done this summer.